All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're very happy to have you here. And we will start with our presentation, our webinar, and I hope that you can grab as much as we have learned from Nada, from Rachel, Bonnie, and from your experiences as well. So today, we will start with a very interesting topic. But first, I would like to introduce myself and my co-champion, Bonnie Politz. My name is Mike Hernandez. I'm from El Salvador in Central America, and I am the youth advisor from the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice. And I have the pleasure to introduce Bonnie.
I am Bonnie Politz. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I say a co-champion of our Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice with Mike. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Bonnie. As I said, we're very happy to have you here, and I hope that you grab as much learning from our speakers, your experiences as well. Next, please. Today's agenda, we have the overview of the YP2LE Learning Work Network with the YSS CoP and the Youth System Collaborative Framework. After that, we have the presentation by our fellows Nada and Rachel from EDC. We will have a discussion room. Depending on the group, we will have 2 breakout rooms, and we will have the last slide with the coming up events. So I hope you're ready. And next. And remember to join our COP at youthpower.org. It's very easy to join. You just click on register, then connect, look for our COP, and then you can sign up very easily. You will find also the recordings in that spot in that website. Thank you very much. Over to you, Bonnie. I believe you're in mute, Bonnie.
I was. Thank you.
That's okay.
So the Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice is one of several communities of practice being, it comes through the Youth Power funding mechanism through USAID. This is our 3rd year that we've had it. And we're really trying to focus on what's happening globally to impact systems change. That's really focused on young people in all systems, whether it be education, health, mental health, workforce development, climate change, whatever system there is how are the systems changing that will make impacts not just for 100 or 1,000 or 2,000 young people, but millions of young people in countries where the work is being done and sustained and at scale. So there is a framework that we've been using throughout these years from the Youth Systems Collaborative, which I am a member of, and Rachel EDC is a member of, and we'll go into the next slide in a second. But first, this is the framework we've been using for people to tell about their work in each of the webinars that we do. And I won't repeat what's on the circle, but you can see obviously stakeholder collaboration is key and at the center of everything. And then from out there, we look at issues around vision and goals, capacity, and then framing all that are some of the really, what we say are complex issues related to systems change around norms and mindsets and policy, resource, services, and practices. And so we try and learn how are people focusing on this and making changes through the work they're doing. You can go on to the next slide. The members of the Youth Systems Collaborative, you'll see here, and we call ourselves a community of practice also. And we've been coming together for almost 5 years now. On a monthly basis, we meet. There have been some things that have been written, some publications. We just finished doing a very successful event at the Making Sense International Global Training Institute that was here recently in the DC area. It was a 3-hour learning about the youth systems framework and how to really use it. So we'll be doing more around a learning agenda and how to be using the framework, hopefully over the next year or 2. Next slide. So we're really excited that we wanted to start talking about moving from theory to practice. We've done a lot of, over the last few years, looking at the framework and learning about it and thinking about theoretically, and more people are starting to think about how to use it, especially as youth systems is now a piece of the new youth and development policy that USAID came out with their revised policy last year. So we're very excited to have two members of our YSC family come on from EDC, the Education Development Center. We have Rachel Blum, who is a senior technical advisor on youth and youth workforce development. And we have Nada Berrada, who is an international project coordinator in the International Development Division. And they are going to be taking us through some of the things that the EDC has been doing to actually utilize the framework in both design and reflection and lessons learned about projects that have been going on. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel. After this, we'll come back together and move into 2 breakout sessions. People will have a choice of where to go for about hopefully 15 minutes or so, and then come back for just a couple of minutes to wind up. So Rachel, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks to you and Mike for inviting Nada and me to this session. So EDC's been experimenting with the youth systems framework for the past 3 years or so, and we're happy to share our experiences. And so what we'll be doing is sharing 3 ways that we've used the framework, the youth systems framework, in our workforce development projects. So first, we've used it for project design purposes. In the Philippines, we used it to analyze and understand the systems dynamics. And we found that the framework offers a set of useful questions that prompts us to be thinking about the system in different ways. And so by doing so, it helps us align our projects with what's happening in the larger dynamics and the motivations of actors and the incentives that are driving them. Secondly, we've used the framework to help tell our story of impact and also to help our donors tell their story as well. I think probably many of you have had experiences with your own programs where you've been making systems level impact, but it's often really difficult to capture and describe those impacts in ways that's easy for other people to understand. And this is especially true when a project may not have a lot of resources for an external evaluator. And so the framework could possibly offer a way to capture those system impacts. And we did that in Rwanda, where we were using the framework as part of our organizational learning agenda to capture our work over a 12-year period. And then thirdly, Nada's going to share an example of a pause and reflect session that she undertook with EDC's team in Senegal. And in this case, the youth systems framework helped the team analyze and reflect upon the systems changes that were happening toward the end of a 5-year project. And it also helped the team bring to light major considerations for the future design of a new follow-on project. I should note here that EDC did all of these efforts with pretty limited resources, and we used our own internal staff and relatively small levels of effort. So hopefully all of you can be inspired by this presentation and that it might motivate you to incorporate your own systems reflection into your own work. So we'll move on to the first example, which is from the Philippines, where EDC used the framework to design the USAID funded Opportunity 2.0 activity. So sometime around, well, actually over the past several years, the Philippines had been seeing an increase in the number of school dropouts. And especially since COVID, many of the out-of-school youth had not returned to education, nor had they been able to access employment. And in 2016, the president of the Philippines came into power and prioritized out-of-school youth as one of his key priorities. And so around 2018, 2019, the government asked USAID to help the government get out-of-school youth back into education and employment. So EDC was preparing a proposal to USAID to implement the Opportunity 2.0 project. And at that time, when we were designing the proposal, we used the youth systems framework to help make sense of the complex workforce development environment. So interestingly, in the Philippines, I've been to a lot of different countries, and the Philippines is exceptionally complex. There's a number of diverse actors, all from the national level to the regional to the local levels. And many of these actors tend to operate in different silos, and out-of-school youth are not always included among their priorities. And so EDC was trying to make sense of this really complex environment, and the framework gave us a way to describe that kind of high level system that had multiple actors, and it helped us understand how the different actors fit together and how we at EDC and how a USAID program could play a role in that system. So when we were doing the design, we held a couple of in-person analysis sessions, and we used the youth systems framework to do the analysis. And then we followed up with a series of calls with our team in the Philippines to validate that analysis. And so what we did is we actually walked through the different domains and enablers of the youth systems framework. And we started to ask ourselves questions about, okay, what's happening around data and evaluation, or what's happening at the policy level, or what's happening with resources, and what are these major levers of change that we think is in the Philippines, and what can we do to move the needle to improve outcomes for out-of-school youth by maybe tweaking these different levers of change. Just as an example that's here on the left side of the screen, one of our realizations was the importance of aligning the vision and interests of different stakeholders at the municipal level. And so what we recognized that there were diverse stakeholders at the local level, and that they were often more effective at reaching out of school youth when they were working together around a common vision and action plan for out of school youth. And EDC had had previous experience under a previous program in mobilizing mayor's offices to convene other government agencies and the private sector and young people and civil society organizations into what we were calling youth development alliances, which were basically these public-private partnerships for out-of-school youth. And what they did is they helped local governments channel public resources and private resources more effectively for out-of-school youth. So it was taking those silos and really harmonizing them at the local level. And we recognized that this was a huge change agent in terms of really making a difference in the lives of out-of-school young people. And so that was one of our findings and strategies from our analysis that we incorporated into our proposal. After our proposal was accepted by USAID, we then used the framework during a co-design phase. So basically, USAID had assembled the government of the Philippines, both members of the alternative learning system within the Department of Education, and also the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or TESDA. And they got these two government actors together in a room with EDC and its partners, and facilitated a workshop. And so during that workshop, EDC actually presented our analysis here. And actually, if you click, is it Catherine? I don't know who has I'm sorry if I can't remember. Megan, thank you. So what you can see here is the full analysis that we presented during that co-design phase. And so you can see here that we incorporated many of the domains and enablers of the youth systems framework. And this is what we walked through with the stakeholders at the beginning of that co-design phase. And then later, we actually did revisit this a third time. So when we got approval for the project, that was right when COVID started. And so for 2 years, we had been operating remotely. And once our staff started coming back and returning to in-person work, we actually revisited this framework again to reorient the staff during a kickoff orientation after the return to work. Those of you who are interested in finding more out about this activity, we have, we'll paste the link in the chat to the project. So that's for program design. In our second example, we have Rwanda, where EDC used the framework to do a retrospective study. And this was, EDC had been operating a series of projects for about a 12-year period. And we knew that we had been seeing a lot of changes in the workforce system, and that we had played a role in that. And we really wanted to understand that. And we wanted to really be able to tell our story as part of our learning agenda. So we did this retrospective study, which was involved about a desk review of about 150 documents or so. And we did some key informant interviews with about 33 national level stakeholders. And we used the youth system framework to guide the development of our questions that we asked. So that really it was sort of offered a set of prompts and probes that we could ask of the stakeholders. And it ended up into this study that's here on the left of the screen. And those of you who are interested in looking at the report can go to the link that's going to be pasted in the chat. And it's something like a 15-page study or so. And I'm just going to highlight one of the key findings from this report. So one of them had to do with, if we go to the next slide, had to do with data and evaluation and learning, which is one of the key enablers of the youth systems framework. So over the decade or so of its 3 programs, EDC had been working with a network of local service providers, and we had been walking them through a process of collecting and analyzing data on youth employment and skills attainment. And what we did is we actually helped them develop common metrics that weren't originally in place in 2008. So when we first started operating our programs, most service providers at that time had been relying really only on enrollment and completion data as an indicator of their performance. And so over time, we had been working with these partners to measure youth employment outcomes like job placement rate and earnings of participants. And these common performance metrics, supplemented with training and coaching, really made a huge impact in creating a level of transparency about the efficacy of services. And it also helped to elevate the standards of service delivery that local providers were offering. And at the same time, we were also encouraging our partners to use multiple sources of data to triangulate their findings. So, for example, we worked with them to use an employer satisfaction survey so that they could better understand how the private sector was responding to their needs. And we also helped them develop standard protocols for regularly checking in on those employer partners and also checking in on the youth who had been placed in jobs and internships. And meanwhile, we also worked with them to develop do youth listening sessions and tracer studies so that they could generate data from the young people that they were working with. We then were using that data to develop user-friendly communication materials in easy-to-read formats that really helped to legitimize these new innovations that EDC was introducing. And so we use things like slide decks and personal testimonies and simple data visualization techniques like infographics and data dashboards to communicate the message. And what we found is that communication really also made a huge difference in influencing others, like the government or the private sector or even other service providers to be interested, to be curious about what we were doing and to try those new practices or to get engaged in the project. And then finally, we also inspired a culture of learning together among the different service providers. And again, this culture of learning where they were involved in annual reflection and planning meetings, as well as monthly meetings and quarterly meetings. And that really offered safe spaces for partners to discuss the challenges that they had been facing, the successes they had, and the areas in which they could improve. So by doing so, we were really kind of building a culture of continuous improvement that they could carry forward. So that's just one example. We have one more slide, but I think due to time, I'm just going to skip over that and turn over to Nada. And like I said, for those of you who are interested in other examples of what we found from our retrospective study, please feel free to click on the link and you can find all of the findings from Rwanda. So Nada, I'll just turn it over to you and describe our experience from Senegal.
Thank you so much, Rachel. If you'll allow me just a few seconds, I want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank the team for putting this together. It's been such a pleasure to be part of the YSC as coordinator and member. And then also I want to acknowledge all the effort that goes into, I'm the speaker here, but there's so many people that have been involved in the project that I really want to give an acknowledgement to. So with regards to Senegal, so EDC wanted to use the YSC framework to really pause and reflect, and that was towards the conclusion of the Apt Senegal project and approaching the start of a follow-on project, which was called PFPE. So just a quick background on Apt Senegal. This is a project funded by MasterCard, a 5-year project where the team was working at the national level with regional departments to really build the capacity of various actors, including teachers, administrators, and students, to deliver these high-quality programs to prepare youth for the workforce in both secondary education and TVET. And so here, really the goal was to capture where the project may have played a role in the broader systems changes, and also how to use this reflection as a starting point for applying a more intentional systems lens in the follow-on project. Next slide, please. And so very quickly about how we did that. So unfortunately, due to COVID, we could not have in-person meetings. So we organized a 2 days participatory virtual workshop. And again, we had plans to expand and have an additional systems analysis during the follow-on projects to basically gain a more comprehensive insights. And also involve more implementation partners like government and youth. So the first day of the virtual workshop, we had the presentation and discussion of the Rwanda case study because we wanted our teams to have a frame of reference and a case that helps them understand the process of the youth systems approach, but also some of the results of it as well. And then on the second day, we had organized various breakout discussions by each domain and enabler to help the teams reflect on more or less two main questions. One was, how has the Act Senegal project contributed to a youth systems change? So what are some of the impacts? And then how can that process inform priorities for future projects? Next slide. So focusing then on this methodology, what are some of the key takeaways that we've been able to do? Now, the first one, and I really want to acknowledge it and give it its own value, is just to basically sit down and reflect on the team's impact on the systems. Project teams have various opportunities, I think, to think a little bit through their work, but to really just have a dedicated hours to just sit down as a whole and think about each enabler and discuss and have these questions together was really valuable in and of itself. And I just can't really stress that enough. Now, that reflection, of course, led to several kind of, I guess, discoveries, or just have them emerge more into the light. And the first one was to really align on key lever and impacts for future projects and activities. I think what we had begun to see is that by grouping together these project teams that have been working together and reflecting on these various items, there becomes to be more apparent those key levers that have come up. So one example, for instance, is the impact that some of the project has had in mobilizing and aligning the resources for entrepreneurship development programs. I remember one participant saying that, through this work, the word entrepreneurship has really entered into the everyday language. So there was a consensus on some of the impacts that were accomplished on the entrepreneurship development programs in the project. And so the second really item that was almost unanimous is that the team really was inspired by some of the work that was done in Rwanda to institutionalize some of our efforts. And that's what the follow-on project PFBE is really doing, is taking EDC's youth employment and entrepreneurship program at national scale and build that internal capacity. So that was actually, I think, a really interesting insight that kind of led to that institutionalization through the follow-on project that kind of emerged through that discussion. And then another area, of course, is that through the YSC framework, because it provides such a really comprehensive approach to go through each domain and think through these, it's also acknowledging those areas that require additional action and progress. So for example, for Senegal, it was interesting to see that the team had really valued having some of the local labor market assessments. And so one of the kind of goals for further action was to really encourage the local service providers to have these regular LLMAs and update that data so that it can inform some of the training programs that would be offered. So that's a bit for Senegal. I'm happy to delve into additional questions about the hows and the nitty-gritty, but that's overall sort of some of the team takeaways that we really found to be extremely valuable to have. I think now I'm going to leave it to the breakout discussions, and then we're happy again to provide answers to some of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Nada and Rachel. It's just really rewarding and exciting to think about something that, some of us were working on 5 years ago and how it's developing. And there's a lot more we hope to be happening in the next couple of years in terms of actually utilizing the framework and getting it out more. Before we go into the breakouts, just going to give, Mike, I don't think, are there any questions in the chat? No. So if anybody
Hey,
wants,
Bonnie,
yes.
can I say something? I just realized we have 3 of our members from the Philippines that are on this call.
Wow.
So when we do the breakouts, they can also share their own insights, both strengths, weaknesses, limitations, experiences using with the framework and their perspective. So John Hayden Bale, or Hayden, is from our team. Robinson Wee, or his name's Benz, is also on the call, and Ronel Victor de la Cruz, who goes by the name of Tauntaun, he's also on the call. So feel free to probe them for questions too in the breakout session. And thank you guys. We're happy you're here. Yay.
They're amazing.
So before we go into the breaks, I just wanted to give, if anybody wants to just raise their hand, if you have a specific question before we go into the breakouts. I think, I don't want, Anaya?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good night, depending on applications. Yeah, I think I love the title of today's program, and that's what actually made me available, because I really want us to go from paperwork to action. Yeah, not wasting time. Let me go straight to the point. I want to, not really equations. I just want us to be practical about solving the problem of a job. Like, and in Africa, the youth are more, and the unemployment are common among the youth. That's to show that we have more population of the youth that are unemployed. I've seen many NGOs coming into Africa, have been funded by international body to organize entrepreneurships, skill acquisition program. Now, what they do is they just teach them what to do, 1 or 2 things. At the end of the day, people are available there. They count it as number of jobs they've created. And that same people, they remain unemployed. Now, what are they doing? What are they not doing right? I think we should get to a point where even if it's 10 people want to create a job for, let's look after teaching them or showing them how to do it. Let's attach them to organizations who are doing it as in form of internship. So from there, if possible, you pay the organization that is taking them there. Then we'll do a proper follow-up. And I'm sure if this is done, instead of looking for 1,000 people you are teaching, and at the end of the day, there's no feedback, it will be better, even if it's 10 people. Yeah, thank you very much.
Where are you from? Which country?
I'm from Nigeria.
Nigeria. Okay. Thank you. I don't know, Rachel, or if you have any thoughts about it. It feels like sort of a little bit about external organizations coming in, but not doing, sort of the kind of in-depth connection and skill building to benefit from this. So we'll hopefully have a little bit of time when we go into the breakouts, Anaya, for you to sort of also ask this, and but it's a very good point, and we appreciate it. So we're going to have people. There are 2 breakouts we're going to have for hopefully about 15 minutes. One is going to be on design, about using the framework and more of the design opportunities that are out here, and I'm sure it'll merge into a little bit more than that. And also the other one about as a learning tool, the framework as a learning tool. And both of those things were spoken about in Nada and Rachel's presentations. Welcome back, everyone. Looks like this is the group that Nada and I were with, and the other group will come back in a minute. And we'll just take a few minutes to hear a little bit something from each group. I've got a couple of things I can say, Nada, or I don't know if you want to.
Go ahead, Bonnie, and I'm happy to add in.
Okay. Some very good points made.
Yes.
We'll take back to our YSC meeting.
Definitely.
Especially about, we've talked about, youth member groups like Yali, potentially joining the YSC in a different way. So this really gives me some thought about that. So welcome back, everyone. We're excited to see you. I was with Nada and thinking about, how this actually is used as a learning tool, the framework. And just a few points that came up. Question was, how accessible is the framework for young people and an intergenerational dialogue? And what are some of the easier or more accessible levers of change that are part of the framework? Something that came up that Nada was talking about, the more accessible domains may be around stakeholder collaboration, norms and mindsets. Some of the more difficult ones are about systems mapping and policy. Obviously that makes sense. It's policy is changing policies is what's really going to eventually change how the systems work. So, and then there was a question about networks like YALI, the Young African Leadership Initiative. How connected have they been with the YSC, and learning more about the network from the work they're doing. And that really, as I said, takes me to think more about going back to our YSC and thinking about some youth leadership organizations that we may want to have join up with us, so they bring that voice of young people from a more organized perspective into our work as we move forward with, keeping to fine-tuning the framework and everything. So Nada, was that okay? And people or anybody else want to add anything from our group? Yes.
I think you've captured it well.
Okay, Mike, do you have Mike or Rachel? Anything from
Actually, I would like to pass it to Ronel, because he was super inspired. So Ronel, continue with the feedback about how you have used the framework and what your experience has been with it.
Yeah, so thank you, Mike. So I typed in the chat my main experience working at the local level youth systems. The program requires us to be well equipped with fine-tuned tools and techniques in engaging various stakeholders in productive relationships. And because in Opportunity 2.0 we have 15 cities with different contexts, so we have to be adaptable to the context of our own local youth systems. But we're very fortunate because we have a very well equipped, very good advisors who can also talk not just at the national level, but can also dig deep down to each of our site. So yeah.
So Ronel, where
That's
are
it.
you from?
From Opportunity 2.0, working with John, Hayden, with Robinson and Rachel and Nada.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Any other thoughts from your discussion you want to share?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and good evening to those who are on the different zones. Yeah, I just want to add what Ronel have said, that in the Philippines, we work with the system strengthening in the local sites. But I would like to emphasize that, as mentioned by Rachel, working in the Philippines, looking at the systems is quite complex, because there are many players that impacts the youth, and it differs from site to site, and it differs also from the different levels of government structure. Like what we are doing now in Opportunity 2.0 is we have to navigate the different players at the local level, as well as we also have to navigate through the different department at the national level, where local players are directly receiving guidance and instructions and advice from their national counterparts. So we have to work both at the bottom and at the top of the government bureaucracy. And as well as we also have to to engage in all of the in the ecosystem of the youth. The role of the private sector is very also critical in pushing for more and meaningful youth engagement and preparations for transitions to employment entrepreneurship. So we have a complex situation, but if you truly understand the whole system, will be able to navigate to its of the key players. So thank you.
That's a great point. And we always say that, any human being is not one thing. There's not one system that impacts. If you're a young person, you're impacted by what goes on in the community, what happens in education, what happens in workforce, what happens in health and the mental health. And, there's so many workforce develop all these systems. And so part of this is, it is incredibly complex. And one thing, it's almost like, you push down on one thing and another thing pops up that you have to deal with. So we're hoping that the questions and the opportunities to bring more people into these discussions with some very concrete tools can help over time. And again, as we know, systems change, as we said in our small break, it does not happen overnight. It's taken a long time for these systems to get to where they are, and it's going to take a long time for us to reshape them so that they're more meaningful and really meet the needs of so many young people. So any other thoughts? We're pretty close to our end. We really appreciate it. Let's see. Yes, so youth are often left out, need to be at the table. And I would say, and I'll be honest about, even for our Youth Systems Collaborative, I think in the next year, we've got to do a lot more to bring, some groups that are really working with young people across the world into our collaborative, so that we're hearing more from them. Yali was mentioned as one, there's Youth Lead, there's some real opportunities that will also help shape our work moving forward. So Rachel and Nada, thank you so much for this. There's lots of links that were put into the chat for people to get to the work that you described. And if you have more, please get in touch with EDC and Rachel and Nada. And let's see, we have our next one. These are some upcoming YP2LE Learning Network Community of Practice meetings. Tomorrow, Wednesday, there's one, Higher Education, Engagement and Transformation, and then Thursday the 29th. And then next month, we're going to be doing a session with Mathematica, which has been doing some evaluation related work on systems efforts, and they will be reporting about that. So we hope you'll join us. Mike, you have anything you want to close off with?
Thank you guys for joining us today. From all over the world, from the Philippines, from the US, in Central America also, thank you guys. And I would like to thank Rachel and Nada for joining us today as our special speakers and shared everything that you've done within the Philippines and Rwanda. So thank you very much for this amazing presentation and sharing your experiences.
Right. And thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you to Catherine and Megan and Stephanie, our behind the scenes colleagues who make all this happen. So thank you to everyone. Okay. And we'll hopefully see you next month. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.